My name is Emma Carter. For nearly 25 years, I believed my father chose his career over me. He was Captain Daniel Carter of the United States Navy. To the outside world, that title carried weight. Inside our house in Annapolis, it carried silence. He left before sunrise most days. I remember the sound of the front door closing more clearly than his voice. It was a controlled sound, measured, never slammed. He believed in controlled exits. I used to stand at the top of the stairs and watch him knot his tie in the hallway mirror. He never looked up. His reflection belonged to the Navy before it belonged to us. When I was 12, I asked him once why he worked so much. He adjusted his cuff and said, "Duty doesn't ask if you're tired." That was the only explanation I received. By the time I was 17, I understood something without being told. The Navy came first, then reputation, then order. I did not know where I stood in that sequence. I assumed I was last. The investigation began quietly. No headlines, no public scandal, just a shift in atmosphere. Men who once came to dinner stopped calling. Invitations slowed. My father's uniform remained pressed, but he wore it less often. He spent longer hours in his study with the door closed. One evening, I found him sitting at the kitchen table long after midnight. No papers in front of him, no glass in his hand, just stillness. "They're reviewing something," he said without looking at me. "What?" I asked. "Procedure." He never elaborated. The official notice came 3 months later. Internal Navy investigation, allegations of insubordination, obstruction of a review process, conduct unbecoming, words designed to sound precise. He did not fight publicly. There were no interviews, no statements. Within weeks, he was gone from command. Forced retirement, they called it. I called it disappearance. The last conversation we had before I left Annapolis is carved into me with surgical accuracy. He stood by the window overlooking the Chesapeake. The water was gray that day, the kind of gray that erases edges. "I need to know," I said. "Did you do what they're saying?" He did not turn around. "Not every truth can be carried in your hands," he said. I waited. Nothing followed. I thought he meant I wasn't strong enough, that I was a burden he couldn't manage while defending himself, that protecting his career had been easier than protecting me. I left for Washington 2 weeks later. I built a life that did not require his approval: graduate school, policy research, structured work, clean answers. I avoided military circles. I avoided Annapolis. I avoided him. He sent occasional messages, short, practical, weather updates, news articles. Once a photograph of the Chesapeake in early winter. No caption. I responded less each year. When he died, the call came from a neighbor. Heart failure. Sudden. I drove back the next morning. The house had aged without him. Paint peeling along the porch railings, the garden overgrown, the flagpole empty. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and salt. Grief did not arrive dramatically. It moved through me in quiet intervals. While opening cabinets, while sorting through coats, while holding one of his old coffee mugs and noticing the small chip on the rim I had never seen before. I moved room by room with discipline. Kitchen first, then the hall closet, then the attic. His study waited for last. The room was unchanged. Mahogany desk, leather chair, Naval Academy plaque on the wall, a framed photograph of our Chesapeake estate during a summer reception years ago. I stood in the doorway for several minutes before entering. Control first, emotion later. The safe was where it had always been, behind the photograph. He had shown it to me once when I was a child, explaining that security is less about hiding and more about predictability. People look for elaborate concealment. They ignore the obvious. The lock opened on the second attempt. Inside were medals wrapped in cloth, a folded American flag, and a sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Precise block letters, no flourish. Beneath the envelope lay a thin report. The top line read, "Promotion Board, fabricated." The word did not blur. It did not shake. Fabricated, stamped in red. My pulse remained steady. Years of learning to separate reaction from assessment had trained it that way. I sat at his desk and began reading. The document detailed irregularities in a Navy promotion review, evaluation scores altered after submission, recommendation letters revised without author consent, voting members contacted privately outside official channels. The candidate in question, Commander Lily Hayes, daughter of Admiral Richard Hayes. I knew the name. Everyone in Annapolis knew it. Hayes had been the kind of officer whose career unfolded like a brochure. Strategic commands, Pentagon visibility, ceremonial presence at every significant event. The report described objections raised by Captain Daniel Carter. He had requested formal review, demanded audit of evaluation records, cited discrepancies in archived scoring sheets. At the bottom of the document was a notation, submission unrecorded. No signature, no official acknowledgement, no disciplinary action listed in connection to the objection itself. But I remembered the investigation. I remembered the forced retirement. I set the report down carefully. Underneath it was the photograph from the reception at our Chesapeake estate. White tents, naval uniforms, string lights reflecting off the water. Admiral Hayes stood center frame, glass raised, Lily beside him in dress whites. Applause caught mid-air. 3 feet behind them stood my father. He was not applauding. His expression was not anger. It was assessment. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in his handwriting, "Truth has witnesses." Even when it disappears. The sentence was written without pressure marks. No trembling, no hesitation. I opened the envelope addressed to me. Inside was a single page. "If you are reading this," he had written. They succeeded in removing me before the board could be compelled to reconvene. I continued. I refused to sign the revised endorsement. I documented the discrepancies. I requested oversight. The request was intercepted. The language remained measured. No accusations, no bitterness. They will frame this as insubordination. It is simpler that way. My breathing remained even. You will be told that I chose pride over stability, that I resisted command, that I failed to adapt. He paused before the final paragraph. "Not every truth can be carried in your hands," he wrote again, "but some truths must eventually be placed there. If this reaches you, it means the file remained where I left it. That means they believed silence would outlast memory." He ended without apology. There was no "I'm sorry," no justification, only this: you were never the burden. I placed the letter flat on the desk and looked around the study. The walls felt different now, less like retreat, more like containment. Outside, the Chesapeake wind pressed lightly against the windows. The house made small, settling sounds. For 25 years, I believed he chose his career over me. Now I understood something else. He chose to challenge something larger than his career, and they erased him for it. I did not cry. I began organizing the documents. This time, I would not leave Annapolis without understanding everything. I did not contact anyone immediately. Silence, I had learned, is not absence. It is preparation. For 3 days, I remained in the Annapolis house and read every document in the safe twice. I cross-referenced dates. I built a timeline. I listed names mentioned in the report. I wrote down each procedural term used in the internal language, fabricated scoring sheets, revised endorsements, unrecorded submission. The promotion board for Commander Lily Hayes had convened 6 weeks before my father's removal from command. 6 weeks. I searched through his filing cabinets. Most of the drawers held ordinary material: insurance papers, property records, correspondence. In the back of the lowest drawer, behind old manuals, I found a thin folder labeled simply Board, Draft. Inside were copies of evaluation sheets with handwritten notes in the margins. My father's handwriting was clean and narrow. Score inconsistency. Original, 3.8/revised, 4.6. Recommending officer denies authorship of this language. board member contacted privately by Hayes. The pattern was precise. It was not outrage that moved me. It was clarity. The final page in the folder was a typed memorandum addressed to an internal oversight office. The header indicated it had been prepared for submission. There was no proof it had been sent. At the bottom, in his handwriting, one line, "Forward only if system holds." I sat back in his chair and understood what that meant. He had tested the structure. The structure had removed him. The reception in the photograph had taken place 3 nights after the promotion results were announced. It was held on our Chesapeake estate, a property that had been in the Carter family for decades before being sold years ago. Admiral Richard Hayes had been guest of honor. I remembered the night now with sharper edges. The white tent had been lit from beneath, casting everyone in warm, forgiving light. Uniforms glowed. Laughter moved easily across the lawn. Glassware chimed in polite rhythm. Lily Hayes stood near the center of the gathering, accepting congratulations with careful composure. She had the posture of someone raised inside expectation. My father moved through the evening without visible strain. He greeted officers. He shook hands. He stood where required. But he did not applaud. At the time, I thought he was tired. Now I understood something else. I searched online archives for any trace of controversy connected to Lily's appointment. There was none. Her record was described as exemplary, rapid advancement, strategic assignments, strong endorsements from senior command. Admiral Hayes had retired the following year with full honors. Clean record, unquestioned. I closed the laptop. Truth does not disappear, it relocates. On the 4th day, I called a former Navy auditor whose name appeared on the draft memorandum. He had retired 3 years earlier and now worked in private compliance review. He answered on the 2nd ring. "This is Michael Rowan." "My name is Emma Carter," I said. "My father was Captain Daniel Carter." Silence. Then a measured exhale. I wondered when someone would call. We met the next afternoon in a small office overlooking the harbor. He had aged into restraint, gray hair, direct eyes. "I reviewed portions of your father's preliminary findings," he said. "I was never allowed to see the full documentation." "Why?" I asked. "Because the matter was closed before it was opened." He did not dramatize it. He did not lower his voice. "The board for Commander Hayes was considered strategically sensitive," he continued. "Her father's position created visibility. And my father? Your father filed a procedural challenge. It required escalation. Instead, he was cited for disruption of process." The phrasing was almost clinical. He was accused of insubordination for refusing to endorse the final report. Rowan slid a thin envelope across the table. I kept copies of what I was permitted to review. Inside were internal emails. Not many. Enough. One from a board member expressing concern about score adjustments. One from an administrative officer noting that senior leadership recommends cohesion on final tallies. One message from Admiral Hayes' office requesting a streamlined outcome. No direct order. No explicit instruction. Pressure does not need to shout. "Why didn't you go public?" I asked. Rowan held my gaze. "Because the documentation I saw was insufficient without your father's formal submission, and because the Navy protects itself." I nodded. He leaned back. "Your father believed in the system," he said. "He thought it would correct itself if he presented facts. And it didn't. No." I returned to Annapolis with copies of everything. That evening, I stood again in his study. The documents now formed a complete arc. Fabricated evaluations, private pressure, objection raised, objection intercepted, officer removed. It was not personal animosity, it was structural protection. Admiral Hayes had celebrated his daughter's command on the same lawn where my father had once taught me how to tie a proper knot. The symbolism was almost careless. I did not feel anger. I felt responsibility. The next step required proximity. 3 weeks later, an invitation arrived. Admiral Richard Hayes was hosting a formal celebration at the Naval Officers Club in Washington for his daughter's latest appointment, her selection for Fleet Command. Attendance included senior leadership, retired admirals, and members of the original promotion board. I did not receive the invitation accidentally. I requested it through a professional contact in policy circles. My current position allowed access to such events without raising suspicion. I accepted. The evening of the reception, I wore a simple black dress and carried a slim leather folder. Inside it were copies of the fabricated evaluation comparisons, the intercepted draft memorandum, the internal emails, a statement from Michael Rowan confirming procedural irregularities, a timeline linking my father's removal directly to his objection. I did not intend to confront anyone privately. Public correction requires public space. When I arrived, the ballroom was already filled. Crystal chandeliers, polished floors, a podium positioned precisely at the center. Admiral Hayes stood near the front, smiling with practiced ease. Lily stood beside him in uniform, composed and luminous. The room moved around them as if orbiting a fixed star. I waited. Observation first. Timing second. When Hayes took the stage and raised his glass to congratulate his daughter, applause swelled in disciplined waves. I moved toward the front quietly. He began to speak about legacy, about integrity, about merit. The word merit hung in the air like something unquestioned. I stepped beside the podium. He noticed me only when I placed the sealed folder beneath his printed speech notes. He paused. "Sir," I said calmly, "the promotion board was rigged." The microphone carried my voice without effort. The room did not react at first, then the laughter stopped. I did not raise my volume. I did not explain. I stepped back. Hayes looked down at the folder. He hesitated. Then he opened it. I watched his expression change, not into anger, but into calculation. The room shifted. Witnesses were present, and this time, the documents would not disappear. Admiral Hayes did not look at me first. He looked at the folder. The ballroom remained suspended in polite confusion. A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone near the back gave a short laugh, uncertain whether this was theater or mistake. Hayes adjusted his glasses and opened the folder fully. He read the first page. The change was almost imperceptible. His jaw tightened. His shoulders settled lower, not in weakness but in recalibration. Lily's posture remained precise beside him, though her eyes moved quickly across the top sheet. "What is this?" Hayes asked, still into the microphone. His voice was steady, controlled. "Documentation," I replied. I did not approach the podium again. I stood where I had stepped back, visible but not intrusive. A murmur spread slowly across the room. It was not outrage, it was recognition of risk. Hayes removed the microphone from its stand and lowered it slightly. "This is not the time or place for—" "It is precisely the place," I said. "You are addressing the integrity of advancement within the Navy." The microphone carried my voice before he could mute it. He glanced toward the event coordinator near the stage. No one moved. Power hesitates when it senses witnesses. I did not elaborate. I did not accuse. I simply let the documents exist in the open. Hayes flipped to the comparison sheets, the highlighted score revisions, the duplicated language in recommendation letters. The silence in the room deepened. One of the retired board members seated in the front row leaned forward. I recognized his name from the email correspondence Rowan had given me. He had written, "These tallies do not reflect my original submission." His expression now was not anger. It was memory returning. Hayes closed the folder halfway and looked at me directly for the first time. "You are Captain Carter's daughter." It was not a question. Yes. A slight exhale moved through the room. I was told he accepted the board's decision. "He objected formally," I said. "His submission was never recorded." Lily stepped closer to her father. "This is an allegation," she said evenly, "without context." "It includes context," I replied. I did not look at her. The folder contained the draft memorandum, the email chain, and a sworn statement from Rowan confirming procedural irregularities and his inability to access full documentation after my father's removal. Hayes reopened the file. He did not read quickly now. He read thoroughly. In the third row, another officer stood. "I recall a delay," he said carefully, "after the initial tallies." His voice carried without amplification. "We were informed revisions had been standardized." The word standardized lingered. Hayes lowered the microphone entirely. "This discussion will continue privately," he said. "No," I replied. The word was not loud. It was final. "You are celebrating a record described as exemplary. These documents indicate manipulation of evaluation scores and pressure applied to board members. If they are incorrect, you can say so here." The event coordinator finally approached the stage, whispering urgently. Hayes ignored him. He turned to the retired board member in the front row. "Did you file an objection?" he asked. The man hesitated. "I expressed concern about recalculated metrics." "Did you sign the final endorsement?" "Yes." "Then the matter was resolved." "It was not resolved," I said. "It was sealed." Lily stepped forward. "My record speaks for itself." "It does," I said. "It speaks with altered numbers." The room shifted again, not louder, heavier. Hayes closed the folder fully and handed it to Lily. "For now," he said into the microphone once more, "we will conclude this portion of the evening." No one applauded. He stepped away from the podium without raising his glass. The band remained still. I did not remain to argue. I stepped down from the stage area and walked toward the exit. As I passed the tables, eyes followed, but no one reached out. Witnesses were processing. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. The city moved normally beyond the club doors. My phone vibrated before I reached my car. Unknown number. "Emma Carter," I answered. "This is Commander James Wilcox," the voice said. "I served on that board." "Yes. We need to talk." I agreed to meet the next morning. I did not drive home immediately. I sat in the parking lot and reviewed the evening in sequence. Hayes had not denied the documents. He had not called them false. He had called for privacy. Privacy is where systems repair themselves without accountability. The next morning, Wilcox met me at a federal office building near the Navy Yard. He was direct. "The initial scoring placed Lily Hayes below 2 other candidates," he said. "After recalibration, she ranked first." "Who initiated recalibration?" "We were informed the metrics had been misapplied." "By whom?" "Administrative review from senior leadership." "Which office?" He paused. "Admiral Hayes's." The admission was quiet. "Why did you sign?" "Because the revised documentation bore procedural approval." "And my father?" He refused. Wilcox placed a flash drive on the table. "These are archived communications I retained. I did not intend to use them, but after last night—" He did not finish the sentence. The files contained additional emails, one referencing my father directly. "Captain Carter's resistance must be addressed to preserve cohesion." Another message confirmed a recommendation for disciplinary review due to disruptive refusal to endorse consensus findings. Consensus. I left the building with enough documentation to compel formal review. That afternoon, I submitted the complete file to an independent military auditor with jurisdiction over promotion board integrity. I did not send it to media. I did not threaten exposure. I triggered process. Within 48 hours, the Office of Inspector General acknowledged receipt. Within a week, a formal inquiry was announced. The language was restrained. Preliminary review of procedural concerns regarding historical promotion, board conduct. Hayes released a short statement expressing confidence in the system. Lily issued no statement. My phone began receiving messages, anonymous warnings, suggestions to let history rest, reminders that reputations once damaged cannot be restored. I documented each message. Silence is preparation. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Archived emails surfaced, revisions traced, administrative overrides identified. The draft memorandum my father prepared was located in a restricted server log, never processed but not erased. It had been flagged internally as sensitive. 3 weeks after the reception, Admiral Richard Hayes announced early retirement from advisory duties. The official reason cited personal considerations. Lily Hayes's command was placed under review. No public accusation was made. But within the Navy, systems speak through reassignment. 1 month later, Lily's fleet command was formally revoked pending further findings. The Inspector General's office confirmed manipulation of scoring metrics and undue influence applied during the board process. My father's removal was reclassified. The charge of insubordination was rescinded. The official record stated Captain Daniel Carter raised valid procedural objections regarding promotion integrity. It was written without apology. Systems do not apologize. They amend. I stood once more in my father's study in Annapolis when the formal notice arrived. The Chesapeake was calm that evening. I placed the letter beside his original draft memorandum. Truth had not shouted. It had waited. The letter restoring my father's record arrived in a plain envelope. No insignia, no ceremony, just formal language printed on heavy paper. I opened it at his desk. Following review by the Office of Inspector General, findings confirm procedural manipulation within the promotion board convened on March 14th. Captain Daniel Carter's objections are hereby entered into official record. Prior classification of insubordination is rescinded. Rescinded. The word was precise. Clean. It did not attempt warmth. For years, his name had carried a shadow in Annapolis. Not public disgrace, but quiet doubt. The kind that attaches itself to absence. Now the record stood corrected. There was no applause, no announcement at a podium, no ribbon cutting of reputation, just ink correcting ink. I sat in his chair and read the letter again. I did not imagine what he would have said. He was not a man of visible triumph. He would have nodded once. Then returned to work. The investigation report was longer than the notice. It outlined the internal communication chain, the recalculated metrics, the directive to preserve cohesion, and the administrative review that intercepted his formal challenge. It also detailed the sequence that followed. Within 1 week of his refusal to sign the revised endorsement, a recommendation for disciplinary review was submitted. Within 2 weeks, a complaint citing failure to support unified board findings. Within 6 weeks, forced retirement. There were no words like retaliation. There were no words like corruption. There was only procedural deviation and administrative correction. Systems prefer neutral vocabulary. Admiral Hayes issued no further statement after his advisory resignation. His retirement ceremony remained listed in official archives without amendment. Lily Hayes's revoked command was reassigned quietly to another officer. Her record was marked under review. No public disgrace, just adjustment. The Navy announced updated safeguards regarding promotion board documentation, including mandatory dual archive submission and independent oversight review. Reform rarely names its catalyst. It moves forward without acknowledging who absorbed the damage first. 3 days after receiving the letter, I was contacted by a senior officer from the Naval Personnel Command. "We would like to formally update Captain Carter's service record in person," he said, "with you present." The meeting was scheduled in a small conference room overlooking the yard. The officer placed a bound copy of the amended service record on the table. His file now reflects documented procedural objection consistent with Navy integrity standards, he said. The prior classification has been voided. I nodded. There will also be a notation in the archive clarifying that his removal from command was not due to misconduct. Not due to misconduct. A correction. I signed acknowledgement of receipt. There was no need for further words. As I stood to leave, the officer paused. "Your father believed strongly in institutional integrity," he said. "He may not have seen the outcome, but the correction matters." I did not answer. Correction matters to systems. Meaning belongs elsewhere. That evening, I returned once more to Annapolis. The Chesapeake moved under a pale sky. Late autumn had thinned the trees. The air held quiet weight. I carried the amended service record into his study and placed it beside the original draft memorandum. The two documents formed a closed arc. Objection raised, objection suppressed, objection restored. I sat in the fading light and allowed myself finally to understand his last words. Not every truth can be carried in your hands. For years, I believed he meant I was too fragile. Now I understood something else. He meant the truth is heavy when held alone. He did not want me carrying it while he still could. He chose to stand inside it himself. Silence had not been dismissal. It had been containment. Outside, the wind moved across the water. The house made its small settling sounds again, but they no longer felt like waiting. The following week, a brief internal notice circulated among senior officers acknowledging procedural reform inspired by recent historical review. No names attached. That was acceptable. Witnesses existed. That was enough. The anonymous messages on my phone stopped. The warnings faded. Pressure dissolves when it loses leverage. I did not seek interviews. I declined requests from two journalists who had heard fragments of the story. Public spectacle would not restore him further. It would only shift focus. Instead, I requested a small administrative update at the Naval Academy Archive. Captain Daniel Carter's biographical summary now reads, "Advocated for procedural integrity in promotion review. Record formally amended following Inspector General findings." The wording is restrained. So was he. I walked once more along the docks near the yard before leaving Annapolis for the last time. For 25 years, I believed he chose his career over me. Now I understood he chose to protect something larger than his career. And he chose not to explain it because explanation would have required exposing the structure before it was ready to withstand exposure. Truth is heavy. Silence breaks you faster. I had mistaken his silence for abandonment. It was discipline. The Chesapeake wind carried salt across my face. The sky darkened gradually, without drama. I did not feel victory. I felt alignment. His name no longer existed in shadow. It stood where it had always belonged. I locked the house and left the key with the estate agent the next morning. As I drove away, I did not look back. Distance had been restored. Boundaries had been clarified. Control had returned to its proper place. Some truths take decades to surface. Some names require patience. Have you ever carried a silence you later realized was protection rather than absence? I would be interested to hear your thoughts. If this story stayed with you, you're welcome to follow along for the next one.